Hello everyone! This week I wanted to talk about how to choose the ideal language teacher. For those of you who don't know, I'm in real life a qualified language teacher and I'm also an online language student. This video will be particularly helpful for those of you who are kind of confused as to how to find the right language teacher for them, because there's so many options out there that it can be a bit overwhelming. Obviously, it would be very difficult for me in only one video to cover everything there is to know about how to choose the right language teacher, but hopefully with all the points we will be discussing, it will be a bit clearer for you how you should choose your language teacher, whether it's online or even in person, by the way. So the first point I wanted to talk about is prices and expectations. So I will be looking at my notes a bit because I don't want to lose my train of thought. Okay, so it would be quite difficult actually for me to tell you how much exactly you should spend on a language teacher, because it depends on many things. It depends on how much money you're ready to put in. It depends on where you live, because the salaries will be different. So, you know, take everything with a pinch of salt. But I guess pricing will depend on two main things. So the first thing is the experience of the teacher, and I mean also the qualifications. And the second is the living standards of where the teacher lives. Because if the teacher lives in an expensive country, the prices will be higher, probably. And if they live in a cheaper country, then the rates might be lower. Overall, my opinion is that you don't necessarily need to go for the most expensive teachers, unless maybe you want to do some formal examination in your language. Because in that situation, you probably need a teacher that has experience in teaching for this qualification or exam or, whatever. But if you're only learning a language for fun, I think a cheaper teacher will be okay. I guess the only thing you need really is a teacher that can teach you some of the language and can be sort of enthusiastic, and someone with whom you can have fun while learning. And I would even say, and I'm a teacher, so of course I'm going to say that if you sort of use cheaper teachers, that can allow them to gain some experience. So that can be a good thing. One thing I would add though is that you can't be too demanding if you choose a cheaper teacher, because it would be unfair to ask someone to work for cheap, it's all relative, and then expect them to work like a highly qualified and experienced teacher, which would normally cost much more, if that makes sense. So you can't, for example, expect the teacher to over-prepare the lesson, and you can't expect them to teach perfectly as well, simply because I believe that if you pay someone a lower wage, you can't have such high expectations of them. On the other hand, if you pay someone, let's say, £40 or £50 an hour, then I think you can be quite demanding, not demanding in a sort of entitled way, but you can expect higher standards of professionalism, experience and teaching and all that stuff. I hope that makes sense. So the second point I wanted to talk about is first impressions. So usually the way you will find a tutor or a teacher will be through ads, online, in person, on the street, wherever. And what's good to do is to read the profile carefully, or watch the intro video if it's online. It depends on the platform. And so read their page carefully and see sort of what kind of vibe you get from the tutor. Do you feel like the teacher will be kind, maybe patient, helpful, motivated, humorous? I'm not saying they have to be necessarily all of that, but there are some qualities that I appreciate particularly in a teacher. So I like the teacher to be sort of humorous in particular, and patient. That's the two sort of qualities that I like. But maybe you prefer someone that is really helpful in terms of supporting you more. Maybe that is motivated. You want someone that really is on it, It depends. You might even prefer someone that's quieter, calmer. It takes all kinds. Another thing that's great to do as well is to read the reviews, and maybe to also listen to recommendations from other people, maybe online or in person. So recommendations are quite good because that means that someone has tried the teacher and can tell you that they're reliable. If you read reviews, that can be helpful to see if people are happy about the teacher. But I think reviews are not always reliable, so it's only one thing to look at, but it's not the whole thing. Another thing that can be useful, I don't know if that really fits under first impressions, but is to know if the teacher and you have a language in common. So for example, English, but if you're French, maybe it would be useful if the teacher speaks French quite well. And I'm not saying the teacher needs to be highly proficient. They don't usually. It's not like they need to speak at C2 level to teach a lesson, but it's important so that you can communicate in the lesson. And if they know your native language, or at least the language in which you're teaching well, like me with English, I'm not a native speaker, but I use English for teaching and learning, it's useful because that means that they will be able to explain the grammar through the eyes or the prism of the language you're using for teaching, yeah? So if, for example, you're learning Japanese, if the teacher can sort of explain how that can relate to English, that can be quite useful. Now let's talk about number 3, which is the teaching style. It's very important to know the teacher's teaching style because all teachers will teach differently. That's a very hard sentence to say. Anyway, so as I was saying, you can't assume the teacher's teaching style because some teachers will enjoy teaching grammar, others will prefer to teach through conversation, others through reading, watching videos, etc., etc. And there's no bad way to teach a language because some teachers can really hone the way they teach the language and that can work great. But you need to make sure that it appeals to you because if you're not a big reader or reading is not really something that you care about in your target language, then that's not the right method for you, right? If you're not sure what the teacher's teaching style is, then you can simply ask, or maybe try it, give it a go. Have a trial lesson with a teacher, see if it works for you or not, because sometimes you don't know, until you try. So give it a go. Something that's quite related is also whether the teacher is able to teach what you want. So if you want to learn business English or business whatever language, or if you want to study towards an exam, then you need to make sure that the teacher is able to deliver these types of lessons because just because you're qualified to teach a language doesn't mean you can teach everything in every aspect of the language possible. Every teacher will have things they're particularly good at. Other teachers will just be skilled in many, many things, but they might not be able to teach everything. So it's very important to take that into consideration. Number 4, the first lesson. So far we've talked about everything that happens sort of before the lesson. Now you need to sort of reflect on how the lesson is going. So maybe the first thing I would mention is, do you think or do you feel like the teacher really tries or tried to get an understanding of your needs and goals? It's very important that the teacher really communicates with you and checks with you that whatever they are planning to do or whatever they're doing actually is what you want, because you're paying them, therefore they have to deliver a service which meets your needs. Other things that I feel are important for a teacher to do is to make sure that they assess your level. So they might not give you a formal exam, but just through conversation or making you read some things to sort of test what you understand, what you don't understand, what you need, and so on and so forth. I think it's very hard to teach someone if you don't sort of try to pinpoint exactly where they're at in their language. And the last thing for this point is, does the teacher make you feel comfortable? And I'm not talking about a teacher being creepy. Obviously, if they are creepy, do change. Please don't stay with creepy teachers. But I'm just saying, do they make you feel motivated? Do you feel sort of safe making mistakes? Are they kind of warm in their approach? I mean, it depends on the people, but do you just feel like you have a positive mindset when you're in the lesson? It's important to think about these things because if you feel anxious or stressed during the lesson, before the lesson is okay, but during the lesson, if you feel nervous, then the learning is quite hindered, really, because you're not going to be as receptive to the way they teach, so therefore it's not going to be very productive. Number 5, and I've called it the subsequent lessons. So do you feel like after a few lessons you're making progress and that the teacher is meeting your needs? That's something that you need to think about. If you feel like it's not quite clear where you're going, or there's no real sort of progression, or there's anything at all that makes you unhappy, then that's something to think about and keep in mind. Also, does the teacher keep track of your progress? Normally, a teacher should know what you've done and know where they are going. They should have a general direction to which they're going. And if you feel like they're not really listening to what you want to learn, or they're not making it clear why they're doing what they're doing, or at least if you ask them, if they're not able to tell you why they're doing what they're doing, then it's not really a good sign. That means that they're not really sort of reflecting on how and the type of lessons they're preparing for you. Essentially, as a teacher, you should always know where you're taking your students from and to. Last thing for this point is also, does the teacher challenge you? So do you feel like the lesson is pitched at the right level? Do you feel like maybe it's too hard to the point that it's too complicated, like you have no idea what's going on? Or do you feel like it's too easy to the point that you're not really learning anything new? A good teacher, and that can take a few lessons, so it's not something instant, once they get to know you, they should be able to pitch the lessons at the right level. If after, I would say, 3 or 4 lessons, they're still not getting it quite right, there needs to be a discussion, or maybe they're not able to really identify what you need and your level. And that's kind of a bad thing, but mistakes happen, so if that does happen, chat with your teacher if you feel comfortable doing so. Or then just change your teachers. And that brings me to my 6th point, which is if you don't like it, change it. You know, at the end of the day, it's your money. If they're not meeting your needs, or if they're not what you're looking for whatever reason, it's fine for you to just change. Ideally, just drop them a message, let them know that you enjoyed the time with them, but then you'd like to try another teacher. They'll be understanding, no problem. However, I would consider maybe doing one thing before you just dump your teacher. You know, maybe consider the idea of telling them, giving them feedback, maybe just having a discussion and re-establishing what you want is useful. Sometimes the teacher maybe misunderstood what you wanted, or they thought they were doing it right, but actually maybe they're not. So discussing it and telling the teacher what you need is important. For example, my Japanese teacher was giving me readings every week, and that was just way too much because I like reading, but it's not my main focus. So I just asked her to give me readings every 2 weeks, and that's much better. That means that I can spend more time on other things like revising the grammar and not as much time on the reading. But I could have just asked her not to give me any reading at all if that's not what I wanted to do. So the idea is that usually teachers will be flexible, and at this stage, if they're not flexible, they're not sort of willing to meet you, anywhere where you want them to, then change. You know, it happens. Some teachers just prefer to teach a certain way, and they're not as flexible. That doesn't mean they're bad teachers. They're just not as flexible, and that's it. That's not a big deal. Alright, so I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please consider subscribing, liking this video as well, commenting, give us maybe other criteria or other things to consider when choosing a language teacher, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!